Alright, so today I want to make a video on the carbon tax. Do carbon taxes actually work? Not that I didn't really already have a good idea of what the answer to that was, but these are government, government's own numbers, so I don't think anyone can argue that they're biased regardless of whether you agree or what political side you're on. So yeah, like I said, I don't think you can argue that they're you know, true and whatnot, but they do only go till 2017, but the government they are usually a little bit behind in reporting numbers like that. Even though 2019 is already almost over, they are usually a year or two behind in putting out those kind of numbers. But anyways, I've heard it both ways. I've heard, people that, are on the right and disagree with climate change and the carbon tax say, well, it's done absolutely nothing. And I've heard people that are all for it, that are big on climate change and carbon emissions and all this kind of stuff, say, well, it's decreased it quite a bit actually. And if you read up a little bit there, the real numbers are, I'll read it word for word. Total greenhouse gas emissions in 2017 in BC were 64.5 million tons of CO2. This is a 1.2% increase since 2016 and a 0.5% decrease since 2007. The government of BC's baseline year for assessing reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emission estimates reported here are from BC Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventory 2017 and do not include forest management offsets. So that's the other thing too, is that planting more trees, they don't even include that in there. So if you just go around planting more trees and whatnot, the number might even be lower. But I think based on these numbers, I don't think anyone can argue that a carbon tax does not do what it's intended to do. There is no way you can argue a 0.5% decrease is doing anything. Not to mention the number's actually up since 2016, so I'd like to see the 2018 numbers to see. My guess is that they're probably up a little bit. There's no way they're going to decrease it more than 1.2% in a year. So my guess is they're still up a little bit. And like I say, 0.5% decrease, there's no way in the right mind you can argue that that's doing anything that it's intended to do. I think it's very fair to say that a carbon tax is just a tax grab by the government. And not to mention, like I say, the science is definitely not settled on climate change. And for all the people that disagree with me on that, the overwhelming majority of them, in fact, I would say I don't know if I've even met one person or met one person even online who's actually really dug in, looked at the science and the numbers behind their predictions. The overwhelming majority of the time, they're just repeating what they've been told. And contrary to the other side, most people that disagree with climate change, maybe they're not experts, but they at least look into things themselves. They look at YouTube videos and some experts that are on the other side. And like I say, contrary to popular belief, there is a lot of climate scientists and geologists and experts that do disagree with the climate change hysteria, world's going to end in 10 or 12 years if we don't address climate change facade that's put out there. So, like I said, basically, to sum it up, I don't think anyone can argue that a carbon tax actually works. Now, for all the people on the left that, think climate change is this huge issue, you can disagree with people on carbon taxes and still believe that climate change is an issue that we need to deal with. Because that's something that people on the left don't seem to understand, is that people can disagree with you, but still agree with the bigger picture. And that's something that people on the left just don't seem to understand. And people on the right, to an extent, but people on the left especially, they don't understand that if you disagree with them in the slightest little bit, that means that you disagree with them entirely, and that must mean you're on the complete opposite end of the political spectrum. And that's kind of what's hurting the left so much nowadays in elections. Canada's the one place that it hasn't hurt them. So people on the left that are Canadians are especially bad for this because, you look at, the UK just had their election yesterday. They overwhelmingly voted against the Labor Party. I mean, the states, it's at this point the Democrats are in shambles. Their best candidate is someone who's old, super old, has health issues, can't even talk like and even make up coherent sentences. Like the Democrats are in a lot of trouble. Like I said, basically, I mean, Canadians were the one country have have been, absent to the trend of leftist governments being voted out and not working out. So that's kind of something that hurts Canadians. I mean, conservatives at least, is that we're the one country that hasn't really voted against the left lately. I mean, you look at all the major European countries, the States, the UK. Like, I can't think of any country that has voted a leftist, especially a hard leftist government in recently, other than Canada. So that's kind of another aspect to this. But getting back to the main point, um, like I said, you can think that climate change is an issue, but still not agree with the carbon tax. And most people, I mean, not most people, but a lot of people I talk to believe that a carbon tax is clearly, like, anybody who can think the least bit critically understands that a carbon tax is just another tax grab for government. I mean, the Trudeau government, I think they're generating, what is it, $600 million a year in additional taxes just from the carbon tax. And if you're on the left, your main goal, at least in the big picture, is to give the government the most power as you can possibly give them. And that's what, I mean, like I say, that's what your goal is on the left. I mean, your goal is on the right is to give the government the least power that possible, because you want freedom, you want free markets, you want all this stuff. And it's kind of a fundamental difference between the individual on the left. The individual on the left doesn't believe they can get ahead through their own merits, through their own work ethic. Now, of course, there's exceptions to this. So someone's inevitably going to bring up, well, I'm an exception to this rule, or I know someone on the right who's a freeloader. Well, yes, of course there's exceptions, but the main point being is that if you're on the left, you want the government to have as much power as possible, and because you don't believe that you can get ahead through your own merits and through your own free will, through your own work ethic. And if you're on the right, you believe that having a bigger government will hurt your ability to get ahead, because a bigger government means more regulations, means more taxes, means all that kind of stuff. So it's just a basic facts that, like, we need to understand if we can, because, like I say, people nowadays a big talking point is what's causing this political divide. People are as divided politically as ever. Now, that's debatable if they are or not, which I think they are. I agree with that. But one of the reasons why is that we can't be honest with each other about motives and the truth about both political sides. And the big thing is that the right is scrutinized to the nth degree, and the left isn't scrutinized whatsoever. And I mean, like I said, there's no debating this. I mean, social media is one of the big examples nowadays. All the social media, the major ones at least, are completely biased to the left. I mean, like I say, there's no debating this. You have Project Veritas, you have, even when Jack Dorsey went on Joe Rogan, they're even admitting this kind of stuff. This stuff is clear as day. So people that are, disagreeing with this, I don't have words for you. But basically, like I said, bringing it full circle, I wanted to make a video on, do carbon taxes work or not? And like I say, I think a 0.5% decrease in emissions, I think it's a definitive no. Now, the point being is that if climate change, like the argument I made in other videos, but if climate change was as big of an issue as the climate alarmists would have you think, the whole, cities are going to be underwater within the next 10 years, the world's going to possibly end in the next decade or so. If that was as big of an issue as you claim that it is, there would be billions, maybe even hundreds of billions of dollars to be made by entrepreneurs who could solve the problems. Like, literally. I'm not only that, I would say more. I would say there's easily hundreds of billions of dollars to be made, because if you could save cities from going underwater, well, that's an insane amount of real estate that would be saved, businesses that would be saved. So if it actually was this big issue, there would be tons of money to be made, insane amounts of money to be made in the free market. But no one's really doing it. So I mean, it's a pretty easy to say that it's not this big issue. And scientists have gotten things wrong the majority of time. I mean, up until the 1980s, it was we're gonna have an ice age. You know, the warmest periods for the overwhelming majority of places in North America, at least, were in the early 1900s to mid 1900s. It's not now. So, like I say, I'm kind of rambling a bit, but I'm gonna just leave it here that I don't think anyone can argue with a straight face, like I've said, that a 0.5% decrease is achieving what it's meant to achieve. And if you actually believe in in climate change, not carbon tax, climate change, then there's ways that people can disagree with you but still want to address climate change. Now, personally, I don't think it's an issue whatsoever, but if you think it's an issue, like I said, if we have 10 years or 11 years now to address this, like I say, there's tons of money to there should be, if it's actually this big issue, which, considering the fact that no one's really putting money into it, I think it's pretty safe to say that it isn't. But if it is, there'd be tons of money to be made. Not only that, government should be subsidizing entrepreneurs and businesses that can fix this problem, but they're not. Like, no one's really worried about it. So I'm going to leave it there, but I think it's pretty safe to say that a carbon tax does not do what it's intended to do. And not only that, like I've brought up, is that to meet the Paris Climate Accord numbers that the Canadian government wanted to meet, or pledged to meet, the carbon tax would have to be about quadrupled. So think of how much more things are costing now, and then triple that. Like, that's literally the difference. That's literally the difference. Like, the amount of people that are living paycheck to paycheck, if the carbon tax was tripled, the amount of homelessness would go up drastically. I seen a report today that homelessness in Canada is already going up at record rates. So, you know, this kind of stuff isn't going to work, and all of it for something that we don't even know of for sure yet. Like I said, Canada is such a small amount of the world's emissions. We would be much better off taking all that money and lobbying China and India to reduce their carbon outputs by even 1% would be more than if Canada reduces theirs by 100%. So, like I say, I'm kind of rambling a bit, so I'm going to cut the video off here. If you liked it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.